people. Our guest is in the house, and he is none other than Michael Abels, the composer of Get Out, which won an Oscar, was directed by Jordan Peele, and also the composer of Us, also directed by Jordan Peele, and also the Hugh Jackman star, Bad Education, and he's got a Netflix movie coming up very soon, so I'm pretty sure he's going to tell us all about it. Michael, thank you for joining, and could you tell us a little bit about, how you got into film composing, like your background in music?
Yeah, so I've been a composer. I started writing music even as a kid. I just always thought it would be a really fun game. I remember the song Do Re Mi from The Sound of Music that came out when I was young, very young. But it says right there, it says, once you know these notes, once you got these notes in your head, you can sing a million different tunes by mixing them up like this. And I thought, what a fun game, what a fun thing. I'm for that. So I went to USC, University of Southern California, majored in music composition. Always tried to, I did some TV commercials and radio commercials right out of school, but I never really got any traction in the business. So where I got most of my success was doing concert music or orchestral music. So I did some of that, and some of those tunes, orchestral pieces ended up on YouTube, and I got, a couple dozen hits, but one of them turned out to be Jordan Peele, who was looking for someone to score his first feature. And he wanted someone who I think knew the 20th century kind of avant-garde orchestral sound, because he really likes horror movies that have used some of the concert music of like Penderecki and Lutoslawski and other 20th century contemporary composers. But he also wanted someone who he thought could really understand the point of view of his character, Chris, who is a young black man who's taken home to meet his white girlfriend's family. And so he had the producers hunt me down and give me a call, and I thought I was being punked, but I thought I'd play along. What could go wrong, right? Just play along. And I met Jordan. He's as funny and smart as he seems in all of his interviews. He's the most genuine, talented person ever. And I just thought, I told him, I want you to be successful at whatever you do. And if you think I can help you, then just tell me what I can do, because I'm all about your success and what you're trying to do.
Amazing. And Get Out happened to be your very first feature, right?
Yes. Can you believe that?
and I read up somewhere that once Get Out was released and it was getting all the buzz, Steven Spielberg called Jordan Peele up and told him, you got to use Michael Abels as composer for his next movie. How was that?
Okay. What an endorsement, right? I mean, thank you, Mr. Spielberg. Thank you. So fortunately, Jordan listened to him, and I'm forever grateful.
How did you find out about this?
About what?
About Spielberg having told Jordan.
Jordan told me, because Spielberg called Jordan to rave about Get Out, and not just tell him good job, but he actually, I guess they were on the phone for a while, and Spielberg really wanted to talk, was like breaking down the scenes, like, how did you come up with this idea, and how'd you come, really, you can imagine for Jordan. I mean, Jordan is he was already a Peabody Award-winning actor-writer when he directed Get Out, but Get Out was still his first feature. And to have Steven Spielberg call you and want to talk shop with you,
That's crazy.
Yeah, so it really meant a lot to Jordan to be welcomed by Spielberg as a colleague, and so he shared the conversation with me, kind of just in the incredible, props he had gotten from Spielberg in general. I
mean, the comparison made was you are to Jordan Peele what John Williams was to Spielberg, and that is what an endorsement.
Yeah, very high praise is all I can say. Anyway.
So, well, that's one YouTube success story, folks. And Michael, I'm curious about how you come from an orchestral background and you moved into film scoring. So how do you approach a scene? Like, every scene basically progresses the story, like reveals some sort of new information. How do you tackle this? Like, how does the process work? I'm curious.
Well, it starts with the director has a concept of, just like the director has a concept of how he wants the character perceived and how he or she wants the set design. All of that is thought out, and the director collaborates with the head of each craft to help develop a look, a look for the film and a kind of a pacing for the film that they work on with the editor. And so the composer is one of the sound collaborators. And music, the reason we all love music is its ability to portray emotions. I think better than any other art. So the director comes with, a storytelling agenda for any scene, and also kind of an emotional palette for a scene, let's say. And so it's the composer's job to listen to what the director is intending emotionally and in pacing for a scene, and then use their words and language to interpret that musically, and then act as if, directors, all of them are control freaks in some way, because they are people who think of this entire world and actually, can work with all these people and have it be one vision. So I think directors, if they could write the music, probably would want to do it themselves. And I think if I were a director, I'd want to do it all myself. But you can't. You have to work with people. So you have to, as a composer, you honor that feeling that they want it to come from their vision, and you use your art to help extend their vision into the music of their film. So the answer to your question is, after you get your guidelines from the director, then you use your art to express what you've heard them saying about what the scene needs to do. Got you.
So how much of, how long a leash did you get when it came to Get Out and Us? Like you said, directors can sometimes be control freaks, but again, it depends on how much of a leash you get to play around in the room that you've got.
Well, once you know what the goal is, then like Jordan, but directors in general, they want to be surprised. They want to be inspired by what you're doing, and that's why they've brought you on board, is to bring another element that maybe they haven't even conceived of. And so once you are in the right wheelhouse, right neck of the woods, then they're very open to ideas about how, what that might look like. And they want you to take them places that maybe they didn't think of, because that's only that kind of collaboration just makes the whole idea better. So
I really like what you said before about music being the art that can make, bring out emotions. So when it comes to, the types of movies that you basically scored, you've scored 2 horror movies already, 1 sci-fi, 1 drama, comedy. How do you think, eliciting these emotions from an audience, how does that work? How do you go about shifting genres through music?
That's a great question. There are some, there's a study called music theory, which is the analysis of how music progresses, and it's kind of the study of, if music was language, it's kind of the study of how the language is put together, if that makes sense. So it's like, if you're in your, if you're studying English, let's say, there are nouns, you learn that there are nouns and verbs and adjectives and phrases, and there's rules about how all these things fit together. And the equivalent in music would be music theory. And in music of using Western harmonies, for example, the way that works is kind of established by some rules. And you want to learn what those rules are, only so that when you break them in a way that's invigorating and exciting and fresh. But in that study, you learn about what sounds pleasing and what sounds displeasing, you know, between consonance and dissonance. And in general, people, for darker, troubling emotions, dissonance ends up expressing that. And for more pleasant emotions, harmony, consonant harmony, pleasing harmony depicts that. Now, that's an incredibly simple explanation. You know, within that simplicity, that's like saying there are two colors, red and green. All right. In fact, there are thousands of colors.
Yeah.
If you understand a musical palette like a color palette, that's a way that if you are not trained in music, for you to begin to understand how music works. And the same is true not only of how music functions, but also of the types of sounds. Like a vocal sound, for example, we're trained from birth to interpret human voice sounds as meaning something. In a baby's cry, the first thing a parent has to do is understand which cry means, you know, hunger, and which means pain, and which we're always trying to interpret vocal sounds. And just out of that human experience comes an ability to extract emotion out of virtually any sound. Even a knock, there's an emotional content to what I just did. So as a composer of music that is helping to tell stories, you have to be really conscious of that. Like, what does this sound make me feel? You're always asking yourself. And you want to find new ways that to excite people's ear, get their attention, get them in an emotional space you're looking for. But also there needs to be some element of familiarity so that you can call on their emotional response that they have. I mean, I can't use a vocal sound that sounds terrifying to tell you this is pleasing, you know. That's a much bigger challenge for me than if I'm using a sound that you already think is terrifying. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I mean,
okay.
It's really interesting. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
No, that's how. So if you look at it, your original question was about how do you switch genres. So you see, I'm talking about these things, and I haven't even mentioned genre, right? Because these sort of techniques work across all genres. These are techniques that you apply within whatever genre you're working in,
Gotcha.
and that's how you achieve that.
Wow, that's new. I really like the analogy that you made about two colors, but there being like various shades in there, and it's something that we've inherently learned from birth. So, I mean, when I was watching Get Out, there were certain moments, even in Us, which were so jarring, which were, I mean, I felt it inside me, like how jarring it was. So I'm assuming there were, it's a mix of sounds, but I distinctly heard violin. I might be wrong.
No, there's a lot of violin. There's solo violin as well as a whole string orchestra.
So speaking about string orchestra, do you ever compose digitally?
Yeah, all the time. Usually before a recording session, the recording session happens near the end of a film is almost complete by the time you actually record the instruments. Yeah. Before that, composers rely on some digital mock-ups to help explain to the director what the music will sound like. And those mock-ups are incredibly lifelike these days. It's really like the musical version of CGI. You know, we can do amazing things with our sample libraries of samples of sounds that were recorded by live instruments, but then are played by the computer to do what we want them to do today. And sometimes those sounds are so good. You can also, a lot of my scores use sounds that were live sounds at one point, but then they got digitally enhanced to be different sounding. So they have both the element of having that live element, but also then an enhanced quality that you couldn't get out of an instrument, let's say. So in the Us score, there's this drum that sounds kind of like an oil can, maybe, if you were to tap on it, but it's tuned. And that's an enhanced digital instrument. That's me playing that. It's not. but at some point that sound lived in the world and it got enhanced. So in most of my scores, there's a balance between live instruments and fake instruments, quasi-fake, digitally enhanced instruments, and I'm playing some of those, and then the other musicians are playing the live instruments, and it's a blend of the real world and an artificial heightened reality that we create sonically.
Got you. And how much research do you do before a given movie? Like in something like Get Out, there was this Swahili chant, if I'm not mistaken, and I mean, I know it directly relates to the story being told, but how much research do you do? Because production design, I know, the designers go out there. Sometimes they go abroad into the specific cultures that are probably being hinted at through the story. But when it comes to music, how do you tackle the research process?
What a great question. It really depends on what I feel I need in order to get where I need to go. In the case of the Swahili, so I don't speak Swahili, what we were going for, so that where that music happens is it's over the main titles, and Chris and Rose are driving, maybe they're driving through the countryside on the way to her parents' house. And Chris is a city boy, and he, what we're afraid of is the unfamiliar. So someone from the country may feel at home, but what Jordan wanted people to understand was that this countryside was new and foreign to Chris, and he wasn't comfortable there. So that's one aspect, is we wanted to see this countryside as a maybe unfamiliar, scary place. And the second thing is that the voices were meant to be the voices of the ancestors, of lynching victims and dead slaves, and they're ghosts, and they're meant to be telling Chris essentially just to get out, to be, like, this is not a good place for you. But ghosts don't speak to us ghosts don't say get out to us. They speak in metaphor and in image, and so it had to be a language that us Americans don't speak, but it had to be something that felt, if they were dead slaves, it had to feel like a language that made us know it sounds like these are people from Africa, So Swahili is a very musical language. It's just beautiful. So even though most of the people who ended up being enslaved in the United States didn't speak Swahili, I did that research. I discovered they didn't speak Swahili.
Okay.
Not most of them, but I needed some artistic license, so I chose Swahili anyway. And I began thinking, okay, what would these ghosts say? They would say, get out. Well, get out it wouldn't translate in Swahili the way that it would need to. So I started writing phrases, and I would translate them into Swahili. And then I would see which ones of them informed me musically, which ones had a musical cadence to them. And so I had this little Swahili spreadsheet of things ghosts would say. And right? And it does not sound very poetic, but all the phrases were poetic. And so, and then I used them musically to put them into the music into the emotion of the music. So there's me both researching, on the one hand, doing the research, on the other hand, using poetic license. And because it's a song, there was a point where I was really afraid that maybe I got the translation wrong, I thought maybe there'd be something really bad in there. And so then I found I had to find a native Swahili speaker and say, please tell me that these lyrics are what I think they are. And the good news was I got one line wrong, or not totally wrong, but the meaning of the line actually brought a new dimension to what I thought it said. I thought it said, run far away. And I guess the translation, it was what it was at, it's whether kimbia, una kimbia mbali. And I thought that meant run far away. And what she told me was that it means, it kind of implies you're running in the wrong direction.
Okay, wow.
But that also works. See, that's the beauty of poetry, is that when poetry is ambiguous, and it needs to gain. It's better when it's ambiguous and you're allowed to interpret. So I thought, well, that's actually beautiful. I love that interpretation. So I lucked out, and that's at least that's my journey of research. It's both enough to get me there, and then there's some creative license.
Has anybody noticed all those, all the finer details that you put into the score? Has anyone ever come up to you and said, "Hey, I really like what you did with this segment when it came to the cultural elements"?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people who speak Swahili have mentioned that and have been interested in how that. I mean, I imagine being, I was definitely fascinated about how Kenyans would react to Get Out when they're, and like lots of movies are in English, so they're used to that. But then the main title comes on and it's in Swahili. I thought, yeah, of course people would notice that. Like that's why I wanted to make sure the translation made sense. I didn't want it to be casual, And then any detail you put in a film, there's somebody out there who knows that one detail speaks to them, and they just go, oh my God, look at that, And that's really whether it's in costume design or in production design or music, you always know there'll be a person who'll catch what you're doing.
So that makes it, that makes the whole process worth it.
Yeah, it's an Easter egg that's reserved for the people who, are looking for Easter eggs, I guess.
I love that term. I use that pretty often too. Easter eggs, like sometimes maybe not the general audience is going to notice something that they put in the production design or the costume, but there's always that one person who's going to catch it.
Sure.
Yeah. So something that I do as a director is, when I tell my composer I want something special in a scene, I usually communicate through, I'm like, I want to feel this. I want the audience to feel this. And sometimes I give him a reference. He's on the call, by the way. Ruud, hey man. So, and I also give him references from something that's already being done. So do you get something similar from the directors that you work with, or could you elaborate a little bit about the different processes, the different ways of communication between director and composer?
Yeah, so using temporary music, temp music, is very common, and a lot of times in a scene, because I talked about the difficulty of being able to translate a feeling into music, and how difficult that is for a director who doesn't feel like they know what they want, but directors don't feel like they have the musical language to speak to a musician. Exactly. Whereas when it comes to talking to the DP, the director may not be a director of photography, but they feel like they have a shared language of it needs to be brighter, it needs to be more blue, it needs to, and directors have a lot of frustration in feeling that they don't have the language to talk to the musician, even though they feel like they know exactly what they want. And it's very much like being in a foreign country when you're starving and you want to order, you just want to order food and you don't have the words. It's that you see it in a director's face. You're like, oh. So it's the composer's job to solve that, to say, just use your words. Say what you're feeling, and it's my job to figure out what you mean. So, but that being said, anything a director can use to help communicate, if it's hand signals or, it gets the job done. So temporary music does that. A director will find a piece of music that they think emotionally speaks to what they are trying to say, and they'll use that, and they'll either play that for you just, on their phone away from the film, or sometimes they'll actually cut that into the film itself, because also temp music can help an editor get the right pacing for a scene. And that's another thing that directors need to communicate to editors about the pacing of a scene. And it's hard to do except to have the editor put it all together and then have them go, no. Whereas if there's a piece of music, let's say, that gives them, it gives them the right emotional cadence to cut the scene into. So there's a lot of use for temp music. Now, the downside of it is that then a director can become very attached to that music, to the point that you really are not, you're kind of then you can feel the handcuffs being snapped on when you try to be creative. And it's kind of a hazard of the job, I guess. You have to, because you can ask to listen to the film without any temp music, and most directors are very accommodating about that. But also time is short, and you need to know that you need to get inside your director's head and know what it is that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So hearing the music that speaks to them makes sense. And usually when everyone has good communication, you're able to both give them something that still has the emotional sense, but also is its own creative thing, and brings a unique quality to the film. Because also, a director wants their film to be their film and be a unique experience for an audience. So they're not trying to recreate the wheel in any sense.
Definitely. Have you ever come across those moments where sometimes the edit doesn't really match up with the music that you're trying to compose, and if so, does the edit ever change, or do you try to make sure the score fits the final cut that you already got?
That's a great question. So it's a really important relationship between the director, composer, and editor. And the editor, depending on some of it depends on when the composer is brought into the project. Sometimes there's already a rough cut when the composer comes on, in which case at least half of an editor's work is already done. And if every scene that's together, no matter how they feel about it, there's a reason why it went together this way. They've already solved a lot of problems that they would have had before. So sometimes the editors are very key in informing how the score works. And the composer's not, the director and the editor talk a lot. They have like 100 conversations with, and then usually the composer's only in on maybe one of those, It's not, the composer's not in a different world usually. The composer comes in when he or she needs to. So I can't know those other 99 conversations the director and the editor had about this scene, So I would start with, well, the scene goes this way for a reason. So I'm really going to try to score the scene the way they put it together because they worked hard on it. Yeah. And it's true that sometimes I do, music is so much about pacing that if I feel like the pacing of a scene feels wrong, I notice it. But I don't always just say, oh, this should be, I'm not there to, my job is not to give notes to the editor. But my best way of illustrating a point about the timing of the film or how things are cut is to talk about it through music. Like I'll do music and then if maybe the music works and they love it, in which case then we're done. The director loves the edit, the director loves the music, that's a win. But if something's not quite working and it's also a place where I feel like there's a timing issue, then I'm able to say, well, this music could go a different way, but it would be great if we could cut to her a little earlier, because right. I'll say, do you hear how the music is stalling right now? Like the music's waiting, and the music wouldn't need to wait if we just cut to her a couple seconds, And then when we're talking about music, that's a context where I can give that kind of note, and it's only a suggestion, and sometimes that solves it. Sometimes, and then maybe the solution still ends up being musical, but I also feel like I get the editor and the director understanding why the music's going the way it is, so it's not, so that was a long answer, but it's actually that relationship and how that works is really important. And a composer has to learn how to be effective in that triad. Makes sense.
You mentioned about composers being effective. Do you have any advice for independent filmmakers or directors when it comes to communicating better with the composer? Because, like you said, they're from different worlds, and yeah, maybe we can use temp music, but is there any way, like, do you recommend a director to essentially learn music?
Well, I don't think it's necessary for a director to learn music because, because first of all, we all love music. Every person throughout this world, and but we've got different opinions about it. And they're all based on things that we've been learning since we were infants. You know, they're hardwired. And so I would much rather a director talk in their own language about music than try to feel like they've learned something. Because if a director tells me, you know, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some musical language that they would, you know, like, I had a situation years ago before I met Jordan where someone said no minor chords. And now minor, okay. Now, and to this person who was a, you know, somewhat trained musician, but who was in a directing position, that the music he wanted to hear had no minor chords in it. And that's truly like snapping the handcuffs on, because what he was trying to say was he wanted the music to be uplifting and joyful and inspiring. Okay. But now you know exactly what those three words mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you could, if you were given an assignment, I want a film that is joyful and uplifting and inspiring. Well, you know, you have the whole world. You could tell a million stories that that people would feel like you solved that correctly. But if I said, I don't want to see the color blue, or I don't want to see, you know, like then it's this thing that you're having to avoid, and it's like it's not the way to achieve it. The way to achieve it is to talk about storytelling. Talk about storytelling, talk about the characters' emotions, talk about the actions. Because I think what music provides most is emotions and actions. And so, like, if a scene needs to feel like it's just bubbling with kinetic energy, even though like, look at us here, we're mostly not moving, except I'm trying to move, but, you know, but if our score was just crackling with percussion and said, like, something's up, you know, we would know that whatever we were doing was leading up to a really big thing. It would totally change the dynamic. So, but notice I didn't say you've got to, you know, it's got to have this, it's got to be in the key of A minor, and then it's got to modulate, and then it's got to, you know, like, none of that. I'm saying, here's the emotion, and here's what's about to happen. And when you say that, the composer really knows what you want, but then is also totally free to do it in a way that's going to inspire you and say, yes, I can't wait till the next scene.
That's brilliant, because you brought everything back to storytelling, which is, you know, what this entire conversation is about, storytelling through composing.
Yes.
And you know, when it comes to certain scenes, like you said, about a score slowly building up to some event that you know is, you know, going to explode on screen, it's just so visceral, and like, as a director, I would never know how to communicate that in a musical language. So it's good to know, coming from you, that all right, I don't necessarily need to communicate physically, but just from what I'm feeling. And I also want to know, what other cultural elements did you use in Get Out, and how did that differ from when it came to Us? Because both of these are horror movies, but the stories are completely, you know, different. You have the horror genre, but two different stories. So how did those cultural elements change?
Well, so believe it or not, I don't consider Get Out a horror movie. And I understand that Us is a horror movie.
Okay.
It's more violent than Get Out, and it's really terrifying.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that
what do you consider Get Out? Like, what genre?
I consider Get Out to be a thriller.
Thriller, okay.
Which, and you know, you can argue about where those categories break down, you know, but I'm approaching it like, I mean, Get Out, I always regarded it as being like a Hitchcock film that Hitchcock just didn't, you know, but it's a long, slow, tense burn that only really realizes what's happening at the last 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And if Get Out is disturbing and upsetting, it's because you just know something bad is gonna happen, but you just don't know what. And it's both hilarious, and then there'll be a jump scare that'll just freak you out at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think Jordan does that. That's part of what he is as a director. We've come to know him as someone who can make you laugh and then scream within 30 seconds. And he loves doing that. So I think if I, as the composer, regarded it as a horror movie, I would be locked into something that I don't want to be locked into. I just want you as an audience member to have the experience that Jordan means for you to have in that moment. And you can decide whatever genre that is at the end while you talk with your friends. You know, I'm looking at what are the characters feeling? You know, are they laughing, or are they crying, or are they screaming? And how can I help the audience know that which they're supposed to do in that moment? You know. Now the other thing about so Get Out has these very, you know, elements of Black people on screen and in the music. And, you know, African or African American, you know, we know that when those voices say brother, Kimbia, they're Black voices. And it was important that we know these are Black people talking.
Yeah.
So that was a huge thing. But if my model is a Hitchcock film, that means the harmonic language that I'm using is mostly, I want to be evoking those old Hollywood thrillers. Mm-hmm. You know, I want you. A lot of what music does is what's the word I'm looking for? Subconscious. It makes you feel things without you knowing that you're feeling them, which is why music's so great with film. So what the score is telling the audience most of the time in Get Out is, this film it has a sense of old Hollywood. It's classy. In that way that we think of, you know, dressed up people in black and white have a certain elegance to them, right? That's the score is helping us see the film in that context.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of the time there aren't identifiably African-American elements in the score because I'm using a harmonic language that's designed to evoke these other films which did not necessarily have any African-American element in them. But then those voices, when they come in and they inform Chris and they whisper to him, because of that they were established at the beginning, that was an easy way for me to always bring them into the conversation. Right. So and also there's a lot of unique percussion, some of which is African, some of which is not necessarily. I mean, it wasn't my intention to be 100% culturally authentic, because that's if you go down that road, there's always somebody who knows more than you, who's smarter than you, and who say, well, what about that? You know, and to do that, you get to be right, but you're kind of missing the whole point of what the story, you know, like it's about the storytelling. So there were percussive elements as well that I used to do that. Now that was a long answer, so maybe I'll be quiet.
That's fine. You're going on the right track.
Okay. Well, with Us, it's a story. So there's a racial element to Us in that the lead characters, it centers around a middle-class Black American family. But it's not. The story is not about race. It's about the haves and the have-nots, and our angels versus our demons of our own spirit. And that's true no matter who you are. And so it had to feel more multicultural. And so it had to feel about this duality that was beyond a person's culture. So one example is that the theme from Us is a piece called Anthem, which is this really kind of evil march that sounds like there's some very unhappy people organizing, which is what's going on. So that's why it's a march. But it had to feel, so marches have this sense of feeling very Western, because the rhythmic cadence and the words. You do that, it's not going to sound. It's going to sound like it's Western. It just, the Western cultures love marching, I guess. Anyway, but we were thought, well, how can we make this sound more multicultural? And I couldn't make it sound vocally more multicultural without taking away the marching aspect. Right. So what I decided to do is that in that march, there's a really funky beat. The march is much slower than most marches. And there's underneath this is a beat that makes you go like this. And to me, that was the way of saying, this is not the purely Western march. This is the funky march that everybody of all cultures can march to when they're planning to go show the people, when they're planning to take over, you know, so.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's all about like how much of a creative liberty and a license that you take and tell the story by incorporating the elements that add value and uplift the narrative.
Precisely. Just, I talked for 10 minutes. You said what I said in like 10 seconds.
My next question comes, with the sound design and the mix, because my sound designer and mixer, he's on the call as well. Hey, Shanik. So when you worked on Get Out, I think I read somewhere that you weren't necessarily very close to the sound mixer or the sound design at some stage. So how do you navigate that road? Because these are, like you said, score is just one of the sonic elements that comes in a film. But there are a lot of other things that tie in as well, like the sound design and everything. So how do you marry them together?
Well, how can I explain this? So the music is, as much as the director and the composer really need to bond, it's a very, because music is about emotion, a composer and a director really need to feel a kind of trust that you would of a friend, because that's just where our emotions live in the world of friendship. And so even though that's very important and the composer needs to create a whole musical world for the film, when it comes to the mix, the music is only one element that a director uses to tell the story. There's also the dialogue, kind of important, and the sound design, which can be at least both the natural sound and also maybe an enhanced sonic world that the sound designer is working on, and the music, and maybe other things that I just can't think of right now. But it's the director's job to tell the story sonically. It is not the director's job to show off the score.
Gotcha.
And for a composer, that's really bad news because we want every note of that score to be in there. We want it loud, thank you. But that's not a director's job. A director's job is to tell the sonic story in the mix anyway. Just like visually in the edit, it's her job to tell the visual story. So as a composer, you have to deliver the score and feel like it's excellent without anything else. Like, why even the dialogue? You don't even, my score is so great. No one would need to say a word. It could just be images and music. I think that's a great film. But that's not what the director's going to do. And so the composer understands that. Now, how that relates to sound design is that as a composer, you want the director to have all the sonic choices that he or she needs. You want them to have more choices than they could ever possibly use to tell the story. Because there are some choices that a director's only going to make when they see everything together.
Sure.
And they hear the dialogue, they hear the sound design, they hear the music, and they think, the sound design here is so amazing, maybe we don't even need score. Maybe this scene is silent, and it just, because the sound design provides that, there's a sense of loneliness that and I'm just feeling it, and I don't even need the score. Well, a composer has to be willing to accept that that's going to happen. So my job is to provide the director more than he needs. Because what you don't want is the director going, wow, I wish I had some music in this scene. Because it's much harder to put music in a scene that doesn't have any when you're at the mix than it is to take it out. So finally bringing this to sound design is that I know that the sound designer is doing amazing things, but I expect that there's going to be overlap between what they do and what I do. Because I also provide some sounds, especially in Us, there's a lot of ambience in the score that you wouldn't be sure if it's score or sound design without listening to the score on its own. And that's by design. But I also know that maybe the sound designer has done something that's much better than what I did. or maybe the director will choose this goes this way and not that, you know. So because of that, I don't feel the need to always be checking on what the sound designer is doing, because I would be making those choices for the director before they get to the mix. I'd be going, oh, this is going to be sound design, so I don't need to do, you know. And unless the director tells me, this scene is sound design, so don't do anything because the sound designer's got it. Director says that, I'm like, good, I don't need to do this work. But unless I'm told that by a director, I'm going to do everything that I think the score needs. And I'll know that the sound designer will make it even greater, and maybe there are some places won't be score.
Brilliant. So, guys, we're in the last quarter of this session. So if you have any questions for Michael, you can drop them down in the comments section below. And until then, I have a question from somebody who is a devout fan of yours, but was not able to join this conversation, but he did leave a question. So he tells me that he loves both the opening title themes for Get Out and Us, that it gives him goosebumps every time he listens to it.
Thanks.
And he wants to know what or who really inspired the vocals and the lyrics. I think you singing answered this question, but he kind of wants to know what inspired the choices. Yes.
Well, I think I answered about Get Out and Sikiliza Kwawahenga. The words mean, just so I didn't tell you, it's brother, Kimbia, which means run. Sikiliza Kwawahenga, listen to the ancestors.
Yeah.
Brother, Kimbia, you know, una Kimbia Mbali, you're run far away. Sikiliza Kwa Ukweli, listen to the truth. Kuokoa mwenyewe, save yourself. And so those are the words I ended up using from my spreadsheet. And they were inspired. The reason it's important, singers love, singing is a unique musical art in that it comes from within you. It's personal in a way that playing an instrument isn't quite, which is not to, you know, I play an instrument and it's very personal to me. But a singer needs emotional direction. They need direction like a director gives to an actor, not just a player of an instrument can really, they're willing to hear emotionally what they're supposed to do, but they'd rather just know how fast and what notes and how loud, and it's more left brain for instrumentalists. But therefore a singer, because there's an acting component, they like to know why they're singing what they're singing, and words help inform that. So when I can write words, I'm all about that. In Us, the singing, you know, because it's a march, it has a much more classical Western sound to the vocal quality. It doesn't sound like Black people. It's a mix of people, but it doesn't sound like it's not identifiably one culture or another. The words are nonsense. It sounds like it's sort of Latin, but that's just that's more because of the march and the shape of the melody. The words are actually nonsense, and it was interesting because I talked with Jordan about it being nonsense, and we agreed. But then when I went to write it, I thought it would be easy. And then when I went to write it, I was like, there's really nothing there's no such thing as nonsense, I realized. Everything means something, and even when it doesn't mean anything, it sounds like it means something, and you want to make it mean something. So I had to choose my nonsense really carefully. So that's where those words come from. It's meant to sound familiar and evil, but it's not meant to. I hope there's no translation in some language. I was afraid it would end up meaning something in a language I don't speak, but no, so far no one has told me that it means something.
Well, lucky you didn't summon demons accidentally.
Yes, actually, that's lucky. Does that answer that? I hope that answers that question. So
I hope it does, yeah. And there's one more from Facebook. Someone wants to know whether there's any constant in any of your work. Like, since you come from an orchestral background from there and like what you bring to movies, is there any constant?
I like, I sometimes, what's the answer to this? Yes, even though I can't always describe what it is. Some people, one thing I actively try to do is I try to switch genres. And I would like for people to be surprised when they find out it's music I wrote. You know, I like to be able to be a leopard that changes his spots, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think that that's a skill, and I strive to be that. At the same time, people often tell me that, like, I knew that was one of your scores. And I sometimes think, really? How? but there are things, there are things about the way I write that are absolutely me. Like, there are things I tell young composers, and this is true for all young artists of whatever your art is, know what you're good at. Like, know what your skills are. Mm-hmm. And also know what you're not good at. And you should always, you know, you can always improve. But if you know you're good at something, then that's your thing. That's your brand. Yeah. And you need to, and you should always improve, but you should embrace your brand and be really good at it and identify it and use it. So there are ways that I write. I have a good opinion. I have a lot of opinions about what makes good music, and I won't bore you with all of them because they're very geeky. You have to speak music to know what I mean about that. But
fair enough.
Those are the things, that's the way I write. I write in the way that I listen to the music and go, oh, that works. Mm-hmm. And I use my own set of standards to determine what those things are. So to me, in a very intellectually musical way, my music carries those things in common. So I hope that people who, you know, have a very left brain sense of what music is, hear those things in the things I write and say, oh yeah, that's the thing that Abels would do. So
makes sense.
Some of it has to do with rhythm and the way I develop themes, and I develop them rhythmically more than harmonically, things like that.
Gotcha. Next question comes from Instagram itself. They want to know who are the top 3 composers who have influenced your score.
God. I prefer when other people decide that. I really do. I make this answer always different. You know, it's always different. I mean, I'll give you 3, but other people should tell me who they think they are, because like if you hear an influence of something, if you hear music and it sounds like it's influenced by something, who is to tell you that it wasn't? Like if you hear an influence, yeah, then there's an influence. You know, like your opinion about music matters just as much as anyone else's, because you've heard music all your life. Doesn't matter who you are. You know what you like in music. If you hear, hey, this sounds like this person's influenced by that, then that's valid for you. So I feel like me listing influences why should someone believe what I say about that? But I'm always drawn to the music of Tchaikovsky. He's someone whose music is very emotional, and it works very well, but it's also really emotional. And Prokofiev is another one, but then also Quincy Jones. You know, Quincy Jones is an absolute genius, and he's been very successful in every aspect of the entertainment industry, so much that people don't even think of him as a composer, you know, maybe first. Yeah. But he is, and a wonderful, amazing one. And so I got to meet him once, and that was a thrill for me, thrill of my life. So there's 3.
Another question that is not very similar, but what movie in history would you have loved to score?
Wow. Movie in history. You know, I can't answer that, because it implies that I think I could have done a better job than the person who did it. And that's not fair. Because I'll tell you, a score, if you don't like a score, you know, a composer's job is very, it's a challenging job. And it's always important to remember the director has a more challenging job. but I just have a lot of respect for everyone who does that, and I'm not going to try to rescore their films.
That's a very good answer. And final question. Any advice for young composers out there? How can they develop their craft? How can they, you know, what processes do you think they need to go through in order to become better composers for film?
Well, let's see. So the study of music is lifelong, and anything you can learn about music is valid. And it doesn't matter what style of music you may have a love of a genre of music, and it's possible that you can be a film composer purely through the expression of that genre. But I think you're more suitable as a media composer if you have no genre biases, or if you're a lot more flexible in genre than, you know, we think of an artist whose new album is dropping, right? That artist has a genre. It's all about brand. And you can no more think of that artist who you may love, you know, doing if that artist suddenly came out with an album in another genre, like, they'd be crucified. It'd be like, sell out, you know. I'm canceling him, you know, like, and that's the opposite of a film composer. This is the opposite of a media composer. Is like, oh, you want to, you know, pick a genre. I would love to do it in that genre. And I'm genuinely about that. Like, I love orchestral music, obviously. I've spent a long time studying, doing it. But I'm looking forward to the chance to do an all synthesizer score. I can't wait. Like, I'm looking for a project like that. Gotcha. And that kind of attitude, I think, gives you more possibility as a media composer. It can't be about your brand, because it's about the director's brand. It's about the showrunner's brand. And you have to have both enough ego to know what good music is. I don't show a director any music that I don't think works for the scene, and I can look him or her in the eye and go, this works for the scene. At the same time, if they hate it, I go immediately to, great, tell me what's not working. Is it the emotion? Is it the way, you know, I'm not there like going, what are you talking about? This is great. Why are you, you know, because the argument does not help. You have to go immediately to what works. So you have to have enough ego to write good music, and completely egoless when people aren't happy with it.
That's amazing.
That is not the same as being an artist in the way that an artist drops an album, right? So first thing is to get your mind in the right place. I'll wrap this answer up. And then the last thing to do is find young directors who need music, and offer to score their projects no matter what they are. Because if you develop a relationship with a director, that person will take you with them when they get a bigger project.
Makes sense. Michael, thank you so much for joining this session. You're a busy guy. Thank you so much again. And I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. That's a wrap, people. And stay tuned for something else. I'm going to be dropping a new session. So, yeah.